Where's my money? Minho grabbed the debt collector by the throat and drove his face through the car window. Glass exploded. Blood sprayed the hood. He yanked the man back up, slammed him down harder. 6 months you've been stealing from me. 2,000,000 won. Another slam. Where is it? I can get... Too late. The elevator doors opened behind him. 5 men stepped out, guns raised. Minho saw them in the shattered window reflection. He dropped the collector, spun, fired. The first man's head jerked back. He collapsed. Get him! Minho fired twice. The second man grabbed his chest, went down. A bullet tore through Minho's shoulder. He kept firing. Third man dropped. Another bullet hit Minho's ribs. Pain ripped through him. He fell to one knee but didn't stop. Fired. The fourth man collapsed. The last one ran for the stairs. He's bleeding out. Minho pressed his hand to his side. Blood poured between his fingers, flooding down the dragon tattooed across his chest. He grabbed keys from the nearest body, got to a car, started it. Tires screamed out of the garage. Itaewon streets blurred past. His blood covered the steering wheel, the seat, everything. Vision going dark at the edges. The car slammed into a parked taxi. Metal crunched, glass shattered. Yeah, what are you? Oh God. Minho kicked his door open, stumbled out. His legs barely held him. Someone call. He made it to the nearest building, pushed through the entrance, found stairs, started climbing. 1 floor, 2, 3, 4th floor. His legs quit. He fell against a door. It opened. He hit the floor. White tiles. His blood spread fast beneath him. A woman stood there, staring. Minho looked up, vision fading to black. 1 word left. Please, welcome to the channel. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed, hit the like button, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I value seeing this dark romance community connected across cities, countries, and time zones. Every click, every comment, every bit of support here helps us keep unraveling stories of power, secrecy, and dangerous love together. So settle in briefly and let me take you back to the moment a feared man was saved by the one woman who had no idea who he truly was. His name was Kang Minho, though she wouldn't learn that for 3 days. What she learned first was that his body carried scars like a resume, that he didn't flinch when she dug for bullets without anesthesia using tweezers she'd sterilized over her stove, that his breathing stayed controlled even when she knew the pain should have made him scream. She worked in the dim light of her kitchen, her hands steady despite the illegal surgery she was performing, despite the very real possibility that he could die and she'd have a corpse to explain. When she finally extracted the last bullet, lodged near his rib cage, a centimeter from his lung, he opened his eyes and looked at her with something she couldn't name. Not gratitude, something heavier. "You're good at this," he said in Korean, his Gangnam accent crisp despite the blood loss. "I'm a nurse," Jenna replied in the same language, her Busan Satori still thick despite 5 years, in Seoul. "It's what I do. In hospitals, not kitchens. You didn't give me much choice about the location." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he passed out, and Jenna sat on her blood-stained floor wondering what she'd just done, and why she hadn't hesitated. She'd moved to Korea 5 years ago with her mother's dream folded in her suitcase. They'd planned the trip together, mother and daughter, finally visiting the country her mum had fallen in love with through dramas and music, the place that had given her joy during chemotherapy. But cancer moved faster than savings accounts, and her mother died 3 months before their departure date, leaving Jenna with 2 plane tickets and a choice: stay in Atlanta with the grief, or go to Seoul and carry the dream forward alone. She went, got her nursing license validated, found work at Asan Medical Center, discovered that being a black woman in Korea meant being professionally competent but socially invisible, good enough to save lives on. The night shift, but never quite Korean enough to be trusted with the coveted day rotations, never quite foreign enough to be exotic, just perpetually other in a way that made her excellent at her job and lonely in her life. She'd learned to be small, to not make waves, to accept that belonging was something she'd watch other people experience. And then a dying gangster stumbled into her apartment and she'd saved him without asking questions, and now, nothing would ever be small again. 2 men appeared at her door the next morning as if summoned by instinct. Jenna was awake, hadn't slept, had spent the night monitoring the stranger's breathing, checking his pulse, making sure infection didn't set in. When she answered the knock, she found herself facing 2 men in expensive suits, their eyes scanning her face with undisguised shock. "You saved him," the older one said. "Not a question. He's stable. Needs proper medical care. I did what I could, but we'll handle it from here." The younger man moved past her into the apartment, his hand resting on something beneath his jacket that Jenna knew was a gun. The older man stayed in the doorway, studying her with an expression somewhere between respect and confusion. "He'll want to thank you personally." "That's not necessary." It wasn't a suggestion. He handed her a business card, thick, expensive cardstock with a phone number embossed in silver. "Nothing else. When he's ready, he'll call. You should answer." They removed the stranger from her apartment with the efficiency of people who'd done this before, leaving Jenna alone with blood-stained grout and the growing certainty that she'd just stepped into something she didn't understand. She scrubbed her floor with bleach until her hands cracked, went to work that night and saved a grandmother with congestive heart failure, a teenager who'd overdosed on pills, a construction worker with a severed artery. Her hands were steady. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment the stranger had looked at her and said please, the weight of trust in that single word. For 3 days nothing happened. Jenna worked her shifts, came home to her small apartment in Itaewon, where rent was barely affordable and neighbours were mostly foreign English teachers, who nodded in hallways, but never invited her to their gatherings. Mrs. Park, the Korean woman who lived next door, had stopped greeting her months ago after Jenna had politely declined to help her practice English for the 5th time. Now the woman's silence felt different, heavier, like she was watching through her peephole every time Jenna left. On the 4th day, a black Genesis sedan pulled up outside Asian Medical Center as Jenna was leaving after a double shift. The same 2 men from before. The back door opened. "Mr. Kang requests your presence," the older one said. Jenna was exhausted. Her scrubs were stained with someone else's vomit, and she'd been awake for 19 hours. "I need to sleep." "It's not a request." Something in his tone made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. Jenna got in the car. They drove through Seoul in the early morning light, past Gangnam's glass towers and designer boutiques, into older neighborhoods where buildings pressed close together and neon signs advertised noraebangs and room salons and restaurants that only opened after midnight. The streets here felt different, narrower, watching, like the city was holding its breath. They stopped in front of a hanok, impossibly preserved in the middle of urban chaos. Traditional tile roof, wooden beams, stone walls that had witnessed generations. It looked like a museum piece except for the men standing at the entrance, their suits modern, their eyes alert. Inside, Kang Min-ho sat behind a low wooden table, in a room that smelled of expensive wood oil and old smoke. The change in him was startling. 3 days ago, he'd been dying on her floor. Now he looked like something carved from marble, beautiful in the dangerous way of sharp objects, his features angular and aristocratic, his posture perfect despite the bandages she knew were hidden beneath his black suit. "Sit," he said in English, his accent barely noticeable. Jenna sat on the cushion across from him, aware of the men stationed at the doors, the weight of being in a space where she didn't belong. "You saved my life," Minho said. Statement, not gratitude. "I'm a nurse. It's what I do." "You didn't ask questions. Would you have answered them?" He studied her for a long moment, his eyes the kind of dark that absorbed light. "No." He pushed an envelope across the table. Thick. Heavy. Jenna didn't touch it. "I don't want money," she said. "Everyone wants money. I want to go home and sleep for 12 hours without wondering if the people who shot you are coming for me next." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. "They won't. They're dead." The words landed soft and final, like he was discussing the weather. Jenna felt them settle in her stomach, the casual confirmation of violence. "What do you do?" she asked, though she already knew. You didn't survive 3 bullet wounds with that kind of control, unless violence was your native language. I solve problems, Minho said, for people who can afford my solutions. You're a gangster. I'm a businessman who operates outside traditional regulatory frameworks. That's a very expensive way to say gangster. Now he did smile, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, almost approachable. You're direct. I like that. What do you want from me? Nothing. I wanted to thank you. To repay the debt. You don't owe me anything. I disagree. He leaned forward slightly. In my world, debts are currency. Someone saves your life, that creates an obligation. I don't like obligations. So this, Jenna gestured at the envelope, the room, the implicit power around them, is about clearing your conscience? This is about ensuring you understand that you're under my protection now, whether you want it or not. I don't need protection. You will. There was certainty in his voice that made Jenna's skin prickle. Is that a threat? It's a fact. You saved Kang Minho's life. People will know. Some will respect you for it. Others will try to use you to get to me. And a few very stupid individuals will try to hurt you to hurt me. He pulled something from his pocket. A business card. Matte black with silver text. Just a phone number. You need anything. Protection, money, someone to disappear. You call. Day or night. Jenna took the card because refusing felt more dangerous than accepting. The card stock was heavy, expensive, the kind of thing that announced its own importance. I won't call. You will, Minho said with absolute confidence. Everyone does eventually. She left the Hanok feeling like she'd signed a contract she hadn't read, made a deal she didn't understand. The driver took her home in silence. Jenna climbed the stairs to her office tel, unlocked her door, and stood in her small apartment that suddenly felt like it belonged to a different version of her life. The black card sat in her wallet, like a promise or a threat. She didn't call for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of pretending nothing had changed. She worked her night shifts at Asan Medical Center, saved lives with competent hands and professional distance. She bought triangle kimbap from the convenience store at 3 a.m. because it was cheap and filling. She went to the small gym in her building's basement because the membership was included in her rent. She video called her best friend Amara in Atlanta every Sunday morning and lied about being happy. You sound tired, Amara said one week, her face pixelated on Jenna's phone screen. I'm always tired. Night shift. No, like soul tired. When are you coming home? Home. The word felt complicated. Atlanta was where her mother was buried, where her childhood existed, where people looked like her and she didn't have to translate herself constantly. But it also felt like the past, like a life she'd left behind when she'd boarded that plane with her mother's ashes and her mother's dream. I don't know, Jenna said honestly. Maybe never. Girl, you've been there 5 years and you still sound like you're visiting. When are you going to actually live? The question stayed with Jenna after they hung up. When are you going to actually live? She'd been surviving, yes. Existing. But living? That required belonging, and belonging required being seen. And Jenna had spent 5 years being professionally visible and personally invisible. The card in her wallet felt heavier every day. It was Mrs. Park's son who finally made her use it. Jenna came home from a particularly brutal shift. They'd lost a patient, a young mother who'd come in with what seemed like routine flu symptoms, but turned out to be sepsis, who'd coded on the table despite everything they'd tried. Jenna was emotionally wrung out, physically exhausted, wanting nothing more than a hot shower and unconsciousness. Her apartment door was ajar. She stood in the hallway, every nerve suddenly alert. She'd locked it. She always locked it. Soul was safe, but habit was habit, and growing up in Atlanta had taught her that doors stayed locked. She pushed it open slowly. Her apartment had been destroyed. Not robbed. Destroyed. Drawers emptied onto the floor, clothes scattered, her small bookshelf overturned. Her laptop was gone. Her passport was gone. But worse than the theft was the vandalism. Someone had written on her walls in red paint, Korean characters she could read perfectly. Jeom Dungi Jiburo Dolaga. Go home, Blackie. Jenna stood in the wreckage of her small life and felt something crack open in her chest. 5 years. 5 years of being polite, professional, small. 5 years of ignoring the stares, the comments people made in Korean assuming she couldn't understand the way she was, perpetually other. And someone had come into her home and told her she didn't belong. She called the police. They came, took a statement with barely concealed disinterest. One officer looked at her dark skin, then at the expensive-looking building, then back at her. How long have you been in Korea? He asked in Korean. 5 years. Legally? The question hit like a slap. I'm a registered nurse with a valid E7 visa. I work at Arson Medical Center. Would you like to see my alien registration card? He didn't. They took photos of the damage, promised to investigate, and left within 30 minutes. Their body language made it clear they wouldn't. The building's security guard, Mr. Kim, who'd always been polite, suddenly couldn't remember seeing anyone suspicious. Mrs. Park, when Jenna knocked on her door, pretended not to be home despite the television clearly playing Korean drama dialogue through the thin walls. Jenna sat on her floor surrounded by the wreckage and understood with perfect clarity that she was alone. The police wouldn't help. Her neighbors wouldn't help. The hospital certainly wouldn't help. They'd probably suggest she find a more suitable living situation. Code for, maybe you should leave. She pulled out the black card, stared at it for a long moment, understanding that calling this number was crossing a line she couldn't uncross. She called. Minho answered on the first ring. Tell me where you are. Not hello. Not who is this. Just tell me where you are. Like he'd been waiting 6 weeks for this exact call. How did you? I know your number. I've known it since the day I left your apartment. Tell me where you are. The certainty in his voice, the immediate shift to action, made something in Jenna's chest loosen. She told him her address. Don't touch anything. I'm coming. He was there in 15 minutes. Jenna heard him before she saw him. Footsteps in the hallway, quick and purposeful. Then a knock that was somehow both polite and commanding. She opened the door and there he was, Kang Min-ho in jeans and a black t-shirt, looking impossibly normal except for the way his eyes immediately catalogued every detail of the destruction. The displaced furniture, the violated privacy, the slur on the wall. His expression didn't change. That was somehow worse than anger. Who? He asked quietly. I don't know. Jenna. He said her name like he'd been practicing it, like it was something valuable. Who do you think did this? She told him about Mrs. Park's son, about how he'd started appearing in the hallway when she came home from shifts, always just happening to be there, about the comments he made in Korean assuming she couldn't fully understand, about foreign women, about black women specifically, about how the building was going downhill, about how the CCTV in their hallway had been mysteriously broken for the past 2 weeks. Minho listened without interrupting. When she finished, he pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in rapid Korean too fast for her exhausted brain to follow. He hung up. Pack a bag, he said. What? You're not staying here. This is my home. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his expression was almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Not anymore. I'm not running away because some racist asshole. You're not running. You're being strategic. There's a difference. He moved further into the apartment, his presence somehow making the small space feel even smaller. Whoever did this wanted you to feel unsafe, wanted you to know they could reach you. The police won't help. They never do in situations like this. Your building won't help. So you have 2 choices. Stay here and wait for it to escalate, or let me handle it. Handle it how? Do you really want to know? Jenna thought about the casual way he'd said they're dead when talking about the people who'd shot him. Thought about the men who waited outside the hanok, the infrastructure of violence that surrounded him like an atmosphere. No, she said quietly. I don't want to know, but I'm not leaving my home. Then I'll stay here with you. Those are your options, Jenna. You leave or I stay. Choose. She chose to leave. He took her to the Schiller Hotel, not because it was close, but because it was the best. The kind of place where foreign dignitaries stayed, where the lobby alone probably cost more than her monthly rent. A suite materialized without reservation, without payment she could see. The staff treated Minho with the kind of deference that came from either respect or fear. Jenna stood in the middle of a room larger than her entire apartment, with windows overlooking Namsan Tower lit up against the night sky, and felt the walls of her careful, invisible life finally, completely crumbling. "I can't afford this," she said. "You're not paying." "Minho, tomorrow I'll have your apartment cleaned, locks changed, security installed. You can go. Back in 3 days. But tonight you're staying here where I know you're safe." "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for a long moment, standing by the window with soles spread out below him like something he owned. "When I woke up on your floor, the first thing I saw was your face. Not afraid, not disgusted, just focused, determined, like I was a person worth saving." He turned to look at her. "People don't look at me like that." "What do they look at you like?" "Like I'm Kang Minho, like I'm a problem to be managed or a threat to be avoided or a resource to be used. You looked at me like I was just a man who needed help. You were. I haven't been just a man in 15 years. The honesty in his voice made Jenna's chest ache. She understood suddenly what he was saying. The loneliness of being seen only as what you are, never who you might be underneath. She'd been living a different version of the same isolation. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for helping." "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen what I'm going to do to the people who did this." He left her there in the luxury suite with a phone number to call if she needed anything, and the growing certainty that she'd just traded one kind of vulnerability for another. She didn't sleep. Stood by the window watching Seoul's lights, this city that had never quite felt like home, and wondered what she'd started. Minho showed up the next morning with coffee and her laptop. "How?" "It was in a pawn shop in Yongsan. The owner was very cooperative once we explained the situation." Jenna didn't ask what cooperative meant. She was learning to speak his language, the one beneath Korean and English, where silence meant violence and favors meant leverage, and debts were currency more valuable than one. "My passport? Being returned to your apartment along with everything else that was taken. The building's security system is being upgraded. The footage from the broken camera has been recovered and reviewed." He paused. "Mrs. Park's son has been encouraged to find housing elsewhere." "Encouraged how?" "Do you want details or results?" She wanted details. Wanted to know if encouraged meant threatened or hurt or worse. But asking would make her complicit in whatever had been done, and she wasn't ready for that yet. "Results," she said quietly, "then consider it handled." He stayed for breakfast, ordered room service, more food than 2 people could eat, expensive things Jenna had never tried. They sat at the table by the window and he asked about her work, about nursing, about what had made her choose medicine. She told him about her mother, about watching cancer slowly steal someone you love, about feeling helpless and wanting to learn how to fight back. "That's why you saved me," he said. "You can't help yourself. Saving people is literally my job. It's more than that. You see someone suffering and your instinct is to fix it, even when it's dangerous, even when it's not your responsibility." He looked at her with those dark eyes that absorbed light. "That's going to get you in trouble." "It already did. I saved you." "Yes," he agreed. "You did." Something hung in the air between them, unspoken and heavy. Jenna felt it like a change in pressure before a storm. "I should go home," she said. "Your apartment isn't ready yet." "Then I should go to work." "You worked a double yesterday. You're not scheduled tonight." "How do you know my schedule?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. "You're watching me," Jenna said. "Not a question. I'm protecting you." "That's stalking with better PR." "Yes," he agreed again, unflinching. "Do you want me to stop?" She should have said yes. Should have drawn a line, established boundaries, made it clear that saving his life once didn't give him ownership of hers. "No," she said instead, and watched something flicker in his expression. She went back to her apartment 3 days later. Minho had been thorough. New locks, new security system, fresh paint covering the slur on her wall. Her stolen items returned and cleaned. Even her clothes had been washed and put away, which should have felt invasive but instead felt like care. Mrs. Park's son was gone. Mrs. Park herself avoided eye contact when they passed in the hallway. The building's security guard greeted Jenna by name now, with respect that felt new and purchased. Her apartment felt different, safer, but also marked, like Minho's influence had seeped into the walls, claiming the space as under his protection. The gift started small after that. A replacement stethoscope after hers broke, except this one was a Littman Cardiology 4, the kind Jenna had always wanted, but couldn't justify spending $300 on. A gift certificate to the African grocery store in Itaewon she'd mentioned once in passing, the place that sold palm oil and plantains and made her feel less homesick. Books in English, Octavia Butler, Toni Morrison, Chimamanda, Ngozi Adichie, the kind she'd loved as a teenager but couldn't find in Seoul's English bookstores that mostly stocked business books and test prep. Then the gifts got bigger. An official letter from Asan Medical Center's administration, apologizing for recent workplace incidents and informing her she'd been transferred to the day shift she'd requested 2 years ago. A new apartment, larger, in a building where the neighbors were international families who smiled at her in the elevator and invited her to building events. A membership to the luxury gym in Cheongdam-dong that she'd walked past every day, but never entered because women who looked like her didn't belong in spaces like that. Except now she did, and the staff greeted her by name in English. If you're still here, you already know this isn't just a story. It's someone's life. Maybe even yours. If this is hitting different, hit subscribe. You'll want to see where this goes. You need to stop, Jenna told him when he showed her up at her new apartment one evening, his presence in dark jeans and a fitted black sweater somehow more dangerous than when he wore suits. Stop what? Rearranging my life. Your life was being made small by small people. I'm simply correcting the proportions. They were standing in her living room, this space that was bigger and brighter than her old apartment, with windows that actually let in light and neighbors who didn't make her feel like an intrusion. Everything Minho had given her. I don't need saving, she said. Everyone needs saving sometimes. Is that what you tell yourself? That you're helping me? I tell myself that you saved my life and I'm returning the favor. I tell myself that watching you be diminished every day is unacceptable. I tell myself. He stopped, jaw tight with something he wouldn't say. What? I tell myself to stay away from you, and I can't. The confession landed between them like something dropped from a height. Jenna felt her pulse in her throat. This isn't healthy, she said quietly. I've never been accused of being healthy. Minho, say my name again. She did, and watched something break in his expression, some control he'd been maintaining. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that didn't match the intensity in his eyes. I think about you constantly, he said, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I wake up thinking about you. I go to sleep thinking about you. Every person who disrespects you feels like a personal insult I need to answer with violence. Every time you smile, it feels like winning something I didn't know I was competing for. That's obsession, not, I know what it is. His other hand came up, framing her face. I know it's not healthy. I know I should leave you alone. But I can't. I've tried. For 6 weeks I tried. And then you called me and I had an excuse to see you again, and I've been finding excuses ever since. What do you want from me? Everything, he said simply. And I know that's not fair. I know I'm dangerous and violent and everything you should run from. But I want everything anyway. Jenna should have stepped back. Should have ended this before it started. Should have recognized obsession for what it was, and understood that a man who solved problems with violence wouldn't suddenly become safe just because he looked at her like she mattered. Instead, she kissed him. He responded immediately, his mouth claiming hers with an intensity that made her knees weak, his hands careful despite the hunger in the kiss, like she was something precious that might break. Jenna kissed him back, because she'd been lonely for 5 years, and he was the first person who'd looked at her and seen someone worth obsessing over, worth protecting, worth the risk. They ended up in her bedroom, the one he'd arranged for her, in the apartment he'd given her, on sheets that probably cost more than her old monthly rent. He was careful with her, attentive in a way that felt practiced but not insincere. His hands learning her body like it was terrain he was mapping for future reference. When he moved inside her, his eyes stayed on hers, watching every reaction, cataloguing every sound she made like he was memorizing her pleasure. Afterward, she lay beside him, feeling like she'd crossed a border she couldn't uncross. "What are we doing?" she asked the ceiling. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I can't stop." She should have left, should have ended it there, should have recognized the warning signs, the obsession, the control disguised as care, the violence he carried like a second skin. She stayed. For 3 months they existed in a strange, liminal space. He never called what they had a relationship. She never asked him to. He showed up at her apartment with food when she worked late. Always her favorites. Things he'd somehow learned she loved. She pretended not to notice the black Genesis that followed her to work every morning, the security detail he'd assigned without asking permission. He took her to expensive restaurants in Gangnam, where people stared but never approached, his hand possessive on her back, marking her as his. She learned to hold his hand in public and feel the weight of eyes that couldn't understand what they were seeing. Korean couples who watched them with confusion or disgust. Foreign men who looked at her like she was a traitor for not choosing someone who looked like them. Foreign women who looked at her with envy or judgment. Minho noticed every stare, his body language shifting subtly, protective, dangerous. "We could go somewhere private," he offered once after a particularly brutal dinner where the hostess had tried to seat them in a back corner, out of sight. "No," Jenna said. "I'm tired of being hidden." Something flashed in his eyes. Pride, maybe. Then we won't hide. They didn't talk about his work. She didn't ask where he went when he left in the middle of the night, didn't question the bruised knuckles he came back with, didn't push when he deflected. He lived in darkness. She lived in light. They met somewhere in between and pretended it was sustainable. It wasn't. The first crack appeared on a Saturday in July. Jenna had finished an overnight shift, a brutal one, a car accident victim who'd coded twice before they'd stabilized him, and came home exhausted to find Minho in her apartment. That wasn't unusual. He had a key. She'd given it to him after the second week because he kept appearing anyway, and it seemed pointless to make him wait. What was unusual was the man kneeling on her living room floor. Zip-tied hands, blood from his mouth, eyes wide with terror. Young, maybe 30, in a suit that had been expensive before it got torn and bloodied. 2 of Minho's men flanked him, silent and still as statues. "What the fuck is this?" Jenna demanded. Minho looked up from the man like he'd been interrupted doing paperwork, his expression calm. "He's been selling fentanyl-laced pills to high school students. 3 kids died last week. 1 was 14. Jenna's stomach twisted. She'd been in the ER 2 nights ago when they'd brought in a teenager. A girl with her whole life ahead of her. Brain dead from an overdose. They'd kept her on machines long enough for her parents to say goodbye. "So call the police," she said, even though she already knew what he'd say. "The police are customers." The words landed like stones. Jenna looked at the man on her floor, terrified, bleeding, probably guilty of exactly what Minho said. She was a nurse. She'd taken an oath. First, do no harm. But she'd also held that 14-year-old girl's hand while her parents sobbed, felt her pulse fade under her fingers. "Get him out of my apartment," she said quietly. "Jenna, I don't care what you do to him. I don't want to know. But you don't bring your work into my home." Minho's expression shifted, something cold, sliding behind his eyes. "This is my work. This is what I am. If you're going to be with me, you need to understand that. I'm a nurse. I save lives. You—" She gestured at the bleeding man. "You end them. I protect this city. You control it. That's not the same thing. It is from where I'm standing." The man on the floor started crying, begging in Korean, pleading for mercy. Jenna couldn't look at him, couldn't look at Minho either. "Take him somewhere else," she said. "Please." Minho made a phone call, 2 words in Korean. The men hauled the dealer up and out like he was furniture being relocated. When they were gone, the apartment felt too quiet, the space where the man had been kneeling still visible in the carpet. Minho stood in her living room looking more dangerous than when he'd had a gun in his hand. "I've killed 37 people," he said conversationally, like he was discussing the weather. "That I remember. Probably more I've forgotten. I run protection rackets, illegal gambling and pharmaceutical distribution networks across 3 districts. I bribe police, politicians, judges. I've destroyed businesses that wouldn't cooperate, ruined families that crossed me." He paused, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm telling you this because you need to decide if you can live with who I am." "Why me?" Jenna asked, and hated how her voice broke. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Because when I was dying on your floor, you looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth saving, and I've been chasing that feeling ever since. That's not love. That's obsession. I've never claimed to know the difference." The honesty was brutal. Jenna felt it like a wound. "I need you to leave," she said. He left without argument, and the apartment felt colder for his absence. Jenna didn't see him for 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were the longest of her life. She went to work, came home, tried to remember what her life had been before Kang Minho had bled into it. The problem was that he'd changed everything. The apartment she lived in, his, the shift she worked, his influence, the confidence she moved through Seoul with, built on his protection. He'd rebuilt her life in his image, and now she couldn't separate what was hers from what was his. She missed him, hated herself for missing him, understood for the first time how someone could love a dangerous thing and call it choice. Amara called on Sunday. "You sound different," her friend said immediately. "I'm fine. That's what you said last month and the month before. Jenna, what's going on?" She almost told her, almost explained about the gangster who'd become obsessed with her, the gifts and the protection and the violence that orbited him like satellites. But how could she explain this to Amara, who lived in Atlanta, where things made sense, where dating a dangerous man was a red flag you ran from, not a complicated truth you negotiated with? "I met someone," she said instead. "About damn time. What's he like?" "Dangerous. Obsessive. A criminal who'd admitted to killing nearly 40 people. The first person in 5 years who'd looked at her and seen someone worth protecting." "Complicated," Jenna said. "All the good ones are." After they hung up, Jenna sat in her apartment staring at her phone. She should have told Amara the truth. Should have said she was involved with a man who terrified her and made her feel safe in the same breath. But saying it out loud would make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello? There's a package at your door." Minho's voice, rougher than she remembered. She opened the door. A single box, small and plain. Inside was her mother's necklace, the one that had been stolen from her old apartment, the one she'd thought was gone forever. A small card in Minho's handwriting. "I found it. I thought you'd want it back." She called him. "Where are you? Does it matter?" "Yes." Silence. Then, "Sitting in my car outside your building. I've been here for an hour, trying to decide if I should come up." "Come up." He was at her door in 3 minutes, looking like he hadn't slept in days, his hair disheveled, his clothes rumpled. Not the controlled, dangerous Kang Minho she knew. Just a man who looked lost. "Thank you," she said, holding up the necklace, "for finding this. I had people searching pawn shops in 6 districts. Took them 11 days. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He stayed in the doorway, like he was afraid entering would be presumptuous. "I can't stay away from you, Jenna. I've tried. These 2 weeks I've tried. But I wake up thinking about you and go to sleep. Thinking about you and everything in between is just noise. I missed you too," she admitted quietly. "You shouldn't." "I know. I'm not going to change. I can't become someone safe just because you want me to. I'm not asking you to change. Then what are you asking? Jenna stepped closer, close enough to see the exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. I'm asking you to understand that I can't be part of it. I can't watch you hurt people and pretend I don't see it. I can't sleep next to you and not wonder whose blood you're washing off in my shower. So we end this. Or we find a way to make it work. How? You keep your world separate from mine. I don't ask questions about your work. You don't bring it into my space. We exist in the middle, the place that's just you and me. That's not sustainable long term. Then we'll have it short term until it falls apart. He looked at her like she was something he couldn't quite believe existed. You're choosing this knowing it's temporary. I'm choosing you knowing it's complicated. That's all anyone can do. He crossed the threshold then, pulled her into his arms with the kind of desperate relief that proved he'd expected rejection. They stood there in her doorway, holding each other like survivors of separate disasters. I love you, he said into her hair. I didn't want to. I've spent 2 weeks trying to convince myself I don't. But I wake up thinking about you and go to sleep. Thinking about you and every person who disrespects you feels like a personal insult I need to answer with violence. He pulled back to look at her. You're the only good thing in my life, and I'm terrified I'm going to destroy you just by being near you. I love you too, Jenna said, and I hate that I do. I hate that loving you means compromising things I thought were absolute. But I'm choosing this anyway because loneliness is worse than compromise. We're both making terrible decisions. At least we're making them together. They didn't have sex that night, just held each other on the couch until the sun came up. Two people who knew they were building something on unstable ground but doing it anyway because the alternative was being alone. For 4 months, their compromise worked. Minho kept his business separate. Jenna didn't ask questions. They existed in their own small world. Morning coffee at the cafe near her apartment. Late dinners at quiet restaurants in Itaewon where the owners knew them and didn't judge. Weekends at his penthouse in Cheongdam-dong, where the city spread out below them like something they owned together. He was gentle with her in ways that surprised them both. Remembered how she took her coffee. Sent her articles in English about nursing innovations. Showed up at the hospital with food when she texted that she'd had a bad shift. Learned to cook jjigae the way she liked it. Less salty than traditional because her American palate couldn't handle it. She learned him too. The scar on his shoulder from when he was 19. The way he couldn't sleep without checking the locks 3 times. How he switched to English when he was tired, his soul accent disappearing. The nightmares that made him wake gasping, though he never told her what he dreamed about. They were building something. Fragile, complicated, but theirs. Then Detective Park showed up at Arson Medical Center. Jenna was finishing her shift, changing out of her scrubs in the staff locker room, when the hospital administrator found her. There's a detective who wants to speak with you, she said, her expression carefully neutral. In conference room 3. Jenna's stomach dropped. About what? He didn't say, but Jenna. The administrator lowered her voice. Be careful. Whatever this is about, the hospital can't protect you. The warning was clear. Jenna was on her own. Detective Park was waiting in the conference room, mid-40s with tired eyes and the kind of patient stillness that came from years of waiting for criminals to make mistakes. He stood when she entered, offered his hand. Ms. Williams, thank you for meeting with me. Did I have a choice? A slight smile. There's always a choice. Sit, please. Jenna sat across from him, her nursing training keeping her hands steady even as her pulse raced. I want to talk to you about the night you treated Kang Minho, he said without preamble. I treated a patient who came to my home with gunshot wounds. As a nurse, I'm obligated to provide emergency medical care. You didn't report the gunshot wounds to police. That's a legal requirement. Also a crime. I was scared. Of Kang Minho? Of the people who shot him? Detective Park opened a folder, slid photos across the table. Her old apartment building. Her new apartment building. Her at dinner with Minho. Her getting into his car. A paper trail she hadn't known existed. You're living in an apartment registered to one of his shell companies, Park said quietly. Your hospital shift change came 2 days after you were seen having dinner with him. Your student loans, $60,000, were paid off by a charitable foundation that doesn't legally exist. He paused. You're not a victim, Ms. Williams. You're an accomplice. The word hung in the air like an accusation, because he was right. She'd stopped being a victim months ago. What do you want? Jenna asked. I want Kang Min-ho. I've been trying to build a case against him for 4 years. But he's smart, careful, and everyone who might testify ends up dead or silent. He leaned forward. You're close to him, closer than anyone's been in years. You could help us. You want me to betray him. I want you to do the right thing. And what is the right thing, detective? Turn in the man I love? Cooperate with a system that's never protected me? The police didn't care when my apartment was vandalized. Didn't care when I was harassed at work. But now you want my help? Park's expression didn't change. Kang Min-ho is responsible for at least 40 deaths that we know of. Probably more. He runs drugs, gambling, prostitution. He's corrupted half the police force and a quarter of the city government. Whatever he's done for you doesn't erase that. I'm not saying it does. Then help us stop him. Jenna looked at the photos spread across the table, evidence of a life she'd built with Min-ho, documented and catalogued. Evidence that could destroy them both. And if I don't? Park gathered the photos slowly. Then eventually you'll be answering for his crimes too. Accessory to murder, conspiracy, money laundering. When we finally build a case that sticks, everyone close to him goes down, including you. He stood, placed a card on the table. Think about it. You have my number, but don't think too long. This investigation is moving forward with or without you. He left her sitting there with his card and the weight of impossible choice. Jenna told Min-ho that night. They were at his penthouse. The city lights spread below them, and she laid it all out. Detective Park's visit, the photos, the threat, the offer. He wants you to wear a wire, Min-ho said. Not a question. He didn't say that explicitly, but yes, that's what he wants. Min-ho stood at the window for a long time, his reflection, ghostly in the glass. When he spoke, his voice was carefully empty. They've been circling for months. I knew this was coming. What are you going to do? What I always do. Prepare, adapt, survive. Min-ho. He turned to face her, and his expression was the most open she'd ever seen it, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. I need you to make a choice, Jenna. If you testify against me, I'll go to prison for the rest of my life. Deservedly so. I won't fight you, won't threaten you, won't try to stop you. But I need to know now which side you're on. You just let me destroy you. You saved my life. If you want to end it, that's your right. The absolute trust in his voice, the way he was handing her the power to annihilate him, felt like its own kind of violence. I'm not going to testify against you, she said. Why not? I've killed people, Jenna. Hurt people. Ruined lives. Everything Detective Park said is true. I know. So why choose me? She moved to him, stood, close enough to see the fear he was trying to hide. Because love isn't always about choosing the right thing. Sometimes it's about choosing your thing, your person, even when it makes you complicit, even when it costs you. This will cost you. I know. You could have a normal life, a safe life. You could go back to being just a nurse, just Jenna. No complications. I've never been just Jenna in this country. I've been the black nurse, the foreign worker, the diversity hire. You're the first person who looked at me and saw someone worth protecting, worth obsessing over, worth the risk. She took his face in her hands. So yeah, choosing you makes me complicit, makes me an accomplice. But I'm choosing you anyway. He kissed her like she was oxygen, like she was the only thing keeping him alive. They made love against the window, the city watching, and Jenna understood she was crossing a final line, choosing her side in a war she didn't start. The next morning she called Detective Park. I'm not helping you, she said. Whatever you're building against him, build it without me. Park was quiet for a long moment. You're making a mistake. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. When this goes south, and it will, don't say I didn't warn you. He hung up. Jenna sat with her choice, feeling its weight. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Life continued. Work, time with Minho, the careful balance they'd built. Then the arrest started. Not Minho. They couldn't touch him yet. But everyone around him. His lieutenants, his accountants, his lawyers, his drivers. A coordinated sweep designed to dismantle his organization piece by piece, to isolate him, to make him vulnerable. Jenna watched it on the news, saw his empire crumbling in real time. She called him. No answer. Called his driver. No answer. Went to his penthouse and found it empty, stripped clean like he'd never existed. For 3 days she heard nothing. She went to work in a daze, came home to an apartment that felt like a museum of a life that was ending. On the 4th day, Minho showed up at her door, looking like he'd aged a decade. I need to leave Korea, he said without preamble. The words hit like a physical blow. When? Tonight. Maybe tomorrow. As soon as I arrange transport. Where will you go? Singapore or Dubai? Somewhere I have resources. Somewhere I can rebuild. For how long? I don't know. Months. Years. Depends on how long it takes for this investigation to die or for me to negotiate a settlement. Jenna felt the floor drop out. You're leaving. I have to. Take me with you. The words came out before she could stop them. Minho stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. Jenna, take me with you. I'm a nurse. I can work anywhere. I can get licensed in Singapore or Dubai or wherever. You'd give up everything? Your career here, your life, your chance to finally belong somewhere. I don't belong here. I've never belonged here. 5 years and I'm still foreign, still other, still tolerated but never accepted. She moved closer. I belong with you. He looked at her like she'd stabbed him. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. You'd be giving up your entire life for a man who might not survive the next 6 months, who has enemies in 3 countries, who will probably end up dead or in prison within a year. Then I'll have you for a year. Jenna, I'm offering you an out. Can't you see that? The police think you're a victim. Detective Park will protect you if you cooperate just a little. You can have your life back. Your real life. The one you were supposed to have before I bled into it. I don't want my life back. I want you. I'll ruin you. Then ruin me. They stood there in her apartment, the space he'd given her, the life he'd rearranged, and Jenna understood this was the choice she'd been avoiding since the night he'd bled on her floor. Safety or love, righteousness or truth, the person she was supposed to be or the person she'd become. If you come with me, Minho said slowly, each word careful, there's no coming back. You'll be linked to me forever. Every crime I've committed, every enemy I've made, every danger I face, it becomes yours too. I know. You'll never be just a nurse again, just Jenna. You'll always be Kang Minho's woman. They'll use you to hurt me, to control me, to get information. I know. Your friend in Atlanta, your life there, your mother's grave. You'll be giving up the ability to ever go back safely. I know all of that, Jenna said, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. And I'm still choosing you. I'm still choosing this, whatever it costs. Minho pulled her into his arms like he couldn't quite believe she was real, like she might disappear if he loosened his grip. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you have me anyway. I love you, he said into her hair. I love you, and I'm terrified that loving you is the most selfish thing I've ever done. Love me anyway. They left Seoul that night on a private plane arranged through contacts Jenna didn't ask about, paid for with money she didn't question. She packed one suitcase with clothes and her mother's necklace, and the few things that mattered. Everything else, the apartment, the job, the life she'd built, stayed behind like a skin she was shedding. At Incheon Airport, in the private terminal where wealthy people avoided scrutiny, Minho held her hand like an anchor. "Last chance," he said. "You can still walk away." "I'm not walking away. Singapore won't be easy. We'll be starting over. No infrastructure, no protection, just us, and whatever I can build from nothing. Then we'll build it together." The plane climbed into the night sky, Seoul disappearing below them, the city that had never quite been home fading into darkness. Jenna leaned her head on Minho's shoulder and thought about her mother's dream, of Korea, about how she'd come searching for belonging and found something else entirely. Not acceptance, not safety, not the life she'd planned. Just this. A man who'd bled on her floor and changed everything, a choice that made her complicit, and the strange, terrifying freedom of finally being chosen back. Singapore was humid and crowded and expensive. They stayed in a service apartment in the financial district, while Minho worked 16-hour days rebuilding connections, calling in favors, establishing the kind of infrastructure that would let them survive. Jenna studied for her Singapore nursing license, navigated a new healthcare system, learned to exist in a city where being black and foreign meant something different than it had in Seoul. They fought sometimes. About money, about safety, about the men who showed up at their apartment at strange hours, speaking languages she didn't understand. About the fact that Minho still wouldn't tell her details about his work, still kept her separate from the darkness he moved through. But they also built something. Quiet mornings drinking kopi before the city woke up. Weekend trips to Sentosa where they could pretend to be normal tourists. Nights when he came home exhausted and she'd already have dinner ready, and they'd eat in comfortable silence, two people who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to. 6 months after they arrived, Jenna passed her licensing exam, got a job at Singapore General Hospital, started building a new life that was actually hers, not given to her by Minho's influence, but earned by her own competence. 8 months after they arrived, Minho came home with news. "The investigation in Seoul collapsed," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Insufficient evidence. My lawyers negotiated a settlement. I'm clear. You could go back." "Yes. Will you?" He looked at her across their small apartment, this space they'd made together in a city that wasn't home but was becoming familiar. "Do you want to go back?" Jenna thought about Seoul. The hospital where she'd been good but never quite enough. The neighbors who'd tolerated her but never welcomed her. The life she'd built that had always felt like borrowed time. "No," she said. "I don't think I do." "Then we stay." Just like that? Just like that. They stayed in Singapore, built a life that was messy and complicated and theirs. Minho's business grew, legal this time, or legal enough. Import-export, consulting, the kind of work that made money without making headlines. Jenna worked at the hospital, saved lives, came home to a man who still sometimes woke from nightmares, but who loved her with the kind of intensity that made ordinary life feel extraordinary. A year after they left Seoul, Amara came to visit. "So, this is him," she said, studying Minho over dinner at a hawker center in Chinatown. "The complicated one." "That's me," Minho agreed. "You treat her right?" "I try." "You better. Because she gave up everything for you." "I know." Amara looked at Jenna. "You happy?" It was the question Jenna had been asking herself for a year. Was she happy? She'd given up her career in Seoul, her apartment, her chance at belonging. She was complicit in crime she didn't witness but knew existed. She'd chosen a dangerous man over safety, love over righteousness. But she woke up every morning next to someone who looked at her like she mattered, who remembered how she took her coffee, who'd crossed oceans and rebuilt his life because she'd asked him to, who loved her with the kind of obsessive intensity that should have terrified her, but instead made her feel seen. "Yeah," Jenna said, "I'm happy." 2 years after leaving Seoul, they got married. Small ceremony, just them and a handful of friends Minho had made in Singapore's business community. Jenna wore white because it felt right, even though nothing about their relationship followed traditional scripts. Minho's vows were simple. "You saved my life twice. I'll spend the rest of mine trying to deserve it. 3 years after leaving Seoul, Jenna got a call from Detective Park. Ms. Williams, or is it Mrs. Kang now? Detective, how did you get this number? I'm good at my job. He paused. I wanted you to know, we're closing the investigation. Officially. Kang Min-ho is no longer a person of interest in South Korea. Why are you telling me this? Because I was wrong about you. I thought you were a victim who needed saving. Turns out you knew exactly what you were doing. His voice held something like respect. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Kang. He hung up. Jenna sat with the phone in her hand, feeling a chapter close. That night she told Min-ho about the call. It's really over, she said. You're free. We're free, he corrected. Both of us. They made love that night with the windows open, Singapore's humid air washing over them, and Jenna thought about the woman she'd been when she'd first moved to Korea. Alone, hopeful, desperate to belong. That woman had saved a dying stranger without asking questions and changed the trajectory of her entire life. She didn't regret it. 5 years after leaving Seoul, they had a daughter, dark-skinned and dark-haired, with her mother's eyes and her father's intensity. They named her Nadia, which meant hope in Arabic, and raised her in Singapore where being mixed wasn't unusual, where being different was just another variation of normal. Min-ho was gentle with her in ways that broke Jenna's heart. This man who'd killed people, who'd built an empire on violence, who'd been feared across 3 districts of Seoul. He held his daughter like she was made of light, sang to her in Korean and English, taught her to be brave and kind, and unapologetically herself. You're a good father, Jenna told him one night, watching him rock Nadia to sleep. I'm trying to be better than mine was. You're succeeding. 7 years after leaving Seoul, Jenna's hospital hosted a visiting delegation of Korean doctors. She found herself translating, her Korean rusty but serviceable, and one of the doctors, an older woman from Asan Medical Center, recognized her. You're the nurse who left. We wondered what happened to you. I got married, moved here. Are you happy? That question again. Jenna looked at her life, the job she'd earned, the husband who still looked at her like she was the most important person in his world, the daughter who would grow up knowing she was wanted, the community they'd built in a city that felt more like home than Seoul ever had. Yes, she said, I'm very happy. 10 years after Kang Min-ho bled on her kitchen floor, Jenna stood on their apartment balcony in Singapore watching the city lights. Min-ho came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? He asked. How different my life is from what I planned. Better or worse? She leaned back against him, this man who'd been dying when they met, who'd obsessed over her, who'd rearranged her life and given her choices that weren't really choices, and loved her with an intensity that defied logic. Different, she said. Not better or worse, just different. Do you ever regret it? She thought about the question, about the life she'd given up in Seoul, the career she'd abandoned, the safety she'd traded for love, about being complicit in darkness she didn't witness but knew existed, about raising a daughter with a father whose past included bodies and violence and crimes that could never be fully atoned for. No, she said honestly, I don't regret choosing you, even knowing what it cost, especially knowing what it cost, because the alternative was spending my life trying to belong somewhere that would never fully accept me. And instead, I found someone who chose me back, who saw me, who made me matter. You always mattered. Not like this. They stood there in the humid Singapore night, 2 people who'd built something, impossible out of a moment of compassion and obsession and desperate choice. It wasn't the life Jenna had planned. It wasn't safe or simple or righteous. But it was hers, theirs. And that was enough. Inside their apartment, Nadia called for her mother. Jenna kissed Minho's cheek and went inside, back to the beautiful, complicated life they'd built from blood and choice, and love that defied every rule. She'd saved a dying stranger once without asking questions. He'd saved her right back. And sometimes, that's all love is. 2 broken people choosing each other despite every reason not to. building something fragile and fierce in the space between darkness and light, and calling it home. If this story moved you, if it found you in a moment when you needed to know that belonging isn't about fitting in, it's about being chosen, then pass it on. Share it with someone who's still searching for their person, their place, their truth. Hit that like button, subscribe so these stories keep finding the people who need them. Because some of us don't get the safe love story. Some of us get the complicated one, the one that costs everything and gives everything back. And that's okay. That's enough. Drop a comment if you felt this one. Tell me your story. Tell me you understand. Because if you made it this far, you already do.